Click, 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 click. Always more clicks. All right, that's looking about right. Let me get another tab open. All right, it's 7:16 already. That took a few more clicks than was usual. Why don't we just go ahead and get started? But before we get started with the actual Mishnah, just a reminder that it may seem strange that we are studying from Masechet Niddah in a time of war, that we are carrying on with our investigation into this aspect of Jewish life when so much blood has been shed so needlessly and so mercilessly. And surely if we were in Eretz Israel, I know that all of us would be volunteering and serving in one capacity or another in order to try and bring this conflict to a speedy and just conclusion. But we're not. Instead, we respond through a variety of ways. Hopefully you have taken to additional prayers in the hope of peace and safety. Hopefully you have guided your donations in ways that can help those that are sorely in need. But we also must preserve the sanctity of the mundane. We must preserve the sanctity of studying Torah lishma, of studying Torah because that is a gift to be embraced and loved. The way that our life works means that we cannot come to a halt and glue ourselves to a TV, which is usually very unhelpful. We cannot just wallow in the news as it comes out, but we must continue to serve, to refine our understanding of life, of the path that Judaism wishes us to lead, from that which seems compelling at the moment to that which may seem less compelling, knowing that all of it is about bringing sanctity to life, about bringing an appreciation to the flow of life, and hopefully in that way reinforcing ourselves of the rightness of defending life and being sure that life can be lived in peace. So with that in mind, we will continue our exploration of Masechet Niddah, picking up in chapter 9, Mishnah number 4, excuse me. And I will remind our common listeners that our study of Niddah is coming to a close. There is only Mishnah or chapter 9 and Mishnah 10 and chapter 10. Sorry, been a long day. It's only chapter 9 and chapter 10 remaining, which means I am accepting recommendations or suggestions for the next Masechet for us to study. More on that at another time, but let's go ahead and begin. We pick up in Mishnah number 4 with a continuation of the mystery of spotting a sign of blood flow when we have more than one candidate for the creation of that blood flow. This is something that we talked about extensively last week. In Mishnah 4, we see 3 women who are sleeping in one bed, and blood was found under one of them. They are all unclean. All right, so the basic premise is very similar to the issue of the bench that we talked about before, but here we have one even more obvious and yet complicated. It's obvious because the blood is found under one of them, and we would think that we would attribute the blood to the one that it was found under. However, the rabbis were very cognizant that while people sleep, even in a crowded bed, there is much motion and movement of the body in ways that can blur the boundaries between the different sleepers. As such, we cannot categorically say that it was one or the other if it is in this general kind of situation. We'll deal with more specifics in just a minute. But in a general way, if there are 3 in one bed and blood is found under one, then we have to presume that all 3 are unclean. However, if one of them examined herself, did the bedikah, the check upon herself, and discovered that indeed she is going through Niddah, she was found to be unclean, then she alone is unclean, while the 2 others are clean, for they may attribute the blood to one another, meaning to her. So the one woman who discovers that indeed her Niddah cycle has begun allows the others to metaphorically hang the sighting, claim that the sighting must be from her because she is the one. Now, does this matter? Well, certainly the others will, I'm sure, check themselves as well, but it does matter for a retroactivity, as we discussed many, many chapters ago, and we want to identify one if we can, rather than make all three ritually impure, and thus make possible retroactive statements of impurity happen. Now, there was yet another wrinkle. If they were all not likely to observe blood, meaning that this is at a time in life when they are very unlikely to be observing blood at all, then they must be regarded as though they were likely to observe one, meaning that at this point we not only consider them to be ritually impure, but we also consider them to be in a category of probable menstruation, and thus fall under the normal rules for that category. Now, Mishnah 4 seems, I think, pretty straightforward. Mishnah 5 is going to give us another logic puzzle. If 3 women slept in one bed and blood was found under the middle one, they are all unclean. All right, so let's expand this detail. What we dealt with generically in Mishnah 4 is now being broken into its constituent parts. And this may answer some of the lingering questions that you might have had while studying that, come on, if it's in the middle, if it's on the end, what about the closest to the wall? Those are what we're going to answer. So if it was found under the middle one, then indeed, because of the movement of the people, we can say that, or we can't say who it is likely to have come from, even the middle one herself, and thus all 3 would be considered ritually impure. If it was found under the inner one, meaning the one sleeping closest to the wall, furthest from the edge of the bed, so imagine the bed pushed against the wall, then the 2 inner ones are unclean, while the outer one is clean. Why? Well, again, while we do entertain the idea that people will move and shift in their sleep, if the stain is found up against the wall or the innermost, then really we're talking about likelihood here. It is exceedingly unlikely that it came from the woman all the way on the end, and therefore it would only be the innermost and the middle woman that would be presumed as ritually impure at that point. And the one on the end would not have that presumption. If it was found under the outer one, then likewise, the 2 outer ones are unclean while the inner one is clean. So hopefully the visualization here is making this a little bit more concrete, that wherever it is found will have a material distinction for who might have come into contact with it, meaning who might have generated it to come into and thus make it appear. We're not talking about coming into contact with someone else's, it's about who is actually the one that generated it. Okay. But Rabbi Yehuda said, when is this so? Meaning, under what circumstances? Well, when they passed by way of the foot of the bed, but if they passed across it, they are all unclean. So Rabbi Yehuda is making a fine-tuning to this and saying, wait a minute. If they got onto the bed from the side, thus crossing the entire horizontal distance of the bed, the first one going all the way, the next one going to the middle, and then the last one on the end, then there is much more opportunity for a spreading of the stain from any one of them, and thus the inner and outer play less an important role. It's possible that the inner one left the spot as she went in, and she left it under what would be the outer one sleeping spot. And especially, again, thinking about at night where people are sleeping, they didn't have electric lights that they would roll over and turn out. they would often be going to bed in the dark, and so it would be entirely possible to miss this while getting into bed. However, if they get into the bed vertically, means starting at the, let's go from the Pagam view, the foot of the bed and crawling up each into their position, then we would not say that they are all unclean from the spot that was found, because they didn't cross the territory of each other when getting into their position for bed. Hopefully that works, and my finger illustration was sufficient. All right, and now, if one of them examined herself and was found clean, she remains clean while the two others are unclean. If two examined themselves and were to be found clean, they remain clean while the third is unclean. So far it makes perfect sense. Woman A examines herself. She does not show any sign of blood flow. Therefore, she is ritually pure, and the other two would still be considered ritually impure. However, women A and women B both examine themselves, and A and B both determine that they are not Niddah, then, of course, number 3 would still be presumed to be Niddah and the likely cause of the stain. However, if the 3 examine themselves and were found to be clean, they are all unclean. Now, this is the part that I'm sure you're scratching your head on. If they discovered that they are not Niddah, then why are they all now being considered ritually impure? Well, it's because there is a certain fact that is hanging over this situation, and that's called the bloodstain. There is a bloodstain. These are the 3 people that are in the bed. There are no other explanations for how the blood got there. They didn't come in wearing bloody clothes. They didn't slaughter something. There's no other explanation. Then the blood came from someone, and it came from one of these 3. And if it came from one of these 3, even if they all now appear to be ritually pure from their own examination, we still have to believe that them had a temporary bleed at some point during the night. As such, since we cannot ascertain which one it was, then we have to go back to our default position and assume that all 3 of them are possible sources, and thus all 3 of them are ritually impure. So is everybody following the logic? 1 examines, she exonerates herself. 2 examine, they exonerate themselves. 3 examine, all 3 are back on the hook because it had to come from one of them. Yes, Aaron.
So, Rabbi, is this principle the same as that one I asked about where there was a blood stain on one of them, but we don't know which of the 3 it came from? When I was talking about whether or not the observance was individualistic versus communal?
I'm trying to remember our conversation.
So basically, if one of these 3 girls were not Jewish, would they still all 3 be unclean?
Interesting twist. I think the general view would be that if they could not determine an actual alternative source, that was a definite alternative source, meaning if 2 of them were not Jewish, and the one examined herself and found herself to be clean, then obviously they could attach the ritual impurity to the one. And certainly if both of them checked themselves, they could even attach it to only one that was with them. But if all 3 check, then there's still a probability that it came from somebody about whose Niddah status would render ritual impurity. So yeah, I don't think that would change the calculation in the end.
Didn't we see on that one Mishnah, though, where I think there's 3 of them sharing a cloak and one of them wasn't Jewish and they could attribute the stain to the non-Jewish?
No, I think the one that you're referring to was that there was a woman who lent her cloak to either of these 2 women, not that she necessarily passed it sequentially one to the other.
All right. And I thought because it could potentially be attributed to a non-Jewish person that they said it's clean.
Right. Well, again, if there is an actual legitimate reason to attribute it to a source of ritual impurity that is isolated from these others, then yes, they will often take that as an excuse, as Rabbi Akiva talked about, and as we talked about with the issue of a louse. But here they are talking about a situation where really that's not the level of confusion that's likely to be involved. That they're trying to deal with a different type of confusion. Well, to what can this be compared then? All right, let's use an analogy. To an unclean heap that was mixed with two clean heaps. Now here we're talking about heaps of stone that we know one of them is ritually impure, and we know the others are not ritually impure, but they have now become mixed. We know there was a body under one of them, but we don't know which one it actually had. Well, if they examined one of them and found it to be clean, it is clean, while the two others are unclean, because I didn't find any body, and therefore it's fine. If they examined two of the heaps and found them to be clean, they are clean, while the third one is unclean, because I examined the two and there was no body, and thus those two are clean. If they examined the three and they all were found to be clean, then they are all unclean, the words of Rabbi Meir, right? Why? Because again, we know there was a body, or at least part of a body, under one of the heaps. And having checked all three and not finding it, we have to assume that we just missed it. And if we missed it, then all three of them have to still be presumed to be ritually impure. Yes, sir.
Sorry, this might be off topic, but why do the stones contract impurity? I thought natural objects generally do not contract impurity.
So in this particular case, it's that the stones we know are covering something that is ritually impure, and as such, we have to be careful about how we interact with it, and anything else that might be under that group, and anything that might transfer over that space. The same way that if we are in a cemetery and somebody you have to be careful about where they are walking. So it's not necessarily the stones themselves that are the significant issue here. It is the area of effect from the covered human remains.
All right, because for some reason I thought that these natural objects not only could not contract impurity, but they could actually block impurity so that it wouldn't go above the ohel.
To a certain degree, yes, but when it comes to some types of cemeteries and other types of heaps, then no. It often has to do with whether it's still connected to the ground and whether it's not. But again, yes, that is a whole nother topic. Rabbi Meir used to say, any object that is presumed to be unclean remains unclean until it is known to you where the uncleanness is. But the sages say, one continues the examination of the heap until one reaches bedrock or virgin soil. All right, so Rabbi Meir seems to have this principle that something is impure until we figure out where the purity is. Once we do, then it's no longer considered ritually pure. The rabbis, on the other hand, have a more strict reading on this, where we don't just wait, we have to dig, if you will, that we go down to the bedrock, we remove any of the worked area, that's what they mean by virgin soil, to be sure that nothing, in this case a body part, is lurking under the dirt or stone that would need to be known about. So there is a difference of opinion there. All right, 9:6, as we begin to draw the chapter to its conclusion. We go back to the topic of blood. And we talked before about blood stains that were moist and blood stains that were dry. And we also want to talk about whether or not a blood stain is a blood stain. And one of the ways that we can know that something is a blood stain is by how it is removed. That is to say, whether or not the process for removing blood removes it. If it does, then it's a blood stain. If it doesn't, then it is some other kind of stain that is resistant to this methodology. So what is the methodology? 7 substances should be applied to a stain: tasteless spittle, the liquid of crushed beans, urine, lye, soapwort, simoleon earth, and potash. All right, so this is your ancient tide. This is your cleaning solution that was used to get out those stubborn bloodstains. Now note, it is that all of these were applied to the substance, and more on that in a bit. But these are the unique combination that, when used, will make the blood stain go away. And if it's not a blood stain, then, for example, if it's dye, it will not be removed from the spot. Thus, it becomes a very useful test. Now, if one immersed it and then handled clean things on it, and then applied it to the 7 substances, and the stain did not fade away, it must be dye. And the clean things remain clean, and there is no need to immerse again. So this is a question of, if I scrub it and it doesn't go away, thus meaning it's a dye, can I then say retroactively that it must have always been dye, and thus I do not contract any ritual impurity from my handling it? And the answer for that is yes. If it doesn't shift, if it stays color fast, then that means it wasn't blood, and there is no need for any ritual purification. However, if the stain faded away or grew fainter, it must be a blood stain, and the clean things are unclean, and it is necessary to perform immersion again. So now we find out that it does actually resemble blood, because it's reacting to the mixture, and as such, we can say that it was blood, and that means that there was ritual impurity, and she is going to have to do immersion again. Now, understand that this immersion cycle here is to handle the either-or case. She sees the stain, she thinks that she might be Niddah, so she does ritual a ritual immersion. She comes out and she wants to clean the stain. Well, one of 2 things is going to happen. Either the stain is not going to budge, in which case it was never blood, and that means that she doesn't need to re-immerse, and any tools that she was using to clean it, the pots or pans or such, are not considered ritually impure either. On the other hand, if it does show that it is going to move away, that it is responding to the treatment, then indeed she is ritually impure, and as such, she has to immerse it. It was ritually impure, and she has to immerse it again. So this is a way of hedging bets, I guess you might say, and the outcome will determine retroactively if other steps are needed. Now let's talk about our mixture here, continuing in Mishnah 7. What is meant by tasteless spittle? Well, from one who had eaten nothing, meaning that day. So apparently there was a certain property characteristic to that early morning spit. The Talmud goes in to talk about it, not just from not eating, but even not talking, not speaking out loud at all, is necessary. It has to be the first morning concentration in your mouth from after the night. The liquid of crushed beans, this is the chewing of split beans ready to be swallowed. So apparently, again, there was some sort of reaction that was expected from the mastication of these beans, and that would create a chemical property that was useful. And what do we mean by urine? We mean urine that has fermented, meaning, as the Tosefta points out, 3 days to ferment. What do? one must scour the stain 3 times with each of the substances. If he applied them out of the prescribed order, or if he applied the 7 substances simultaneously, he has done nothing. So it has to be done in this order for it to be considered a legitimate test. And that goes as well for if you would do all of them together. It doesn't mean if you do all of it together and it moves, that doesn't mean that it was blood. It doesn't mean that it wasn't blood. It means you did it wrong and you have to do it correctly. So we can make no determination if you don't follow the procedure properly. For those interested, yes, urine was a common ingredient for many ancient activities, most notably the tanning of leather. Urine has ammonia in it, and indeed ammonia is still used as a cleaning product. Thankfully, we get it in very different sources these days. Mishnah 9:8. For any woman who has a regular period, remember this is the veset that we talked about earlier, meaning that it is established for her that it comes at a regular, predictable manner. For any woman who has such a period, it suffices, meaning it's fine to use that as your reckoning point, to reckon her period of uncleanness for, meaning from the time she discovers the flow. So we talked before about retroactive rendering of things retroactively impure because it had been discovered once she finally checked and discovered that she was now in Niddah. That does not apply, and we talked about this way at the beginning as well, that does not apply to a woman who has this veset, who has a regular period. Instead, we don't go retroactively back to her previous testing if it is showing signs of occurring at the time that it's expected to happen. Then we say this is the beginning rather than adding a retroactive period. Now, what do we mean by veset? Well, we talked about time when we talk in the early days, and we'll talk about time again tonight, I wager. But there are other ways to establish a regularity of period. And these are the signs of a regular period. Again, not timing, but other physical signs. If the woman yawns, sneezes, feels pain at the top of her stomach or the bottom of her bowels, discharges mucus, or is seized by a kind of shivering or any other similar symptoms. What is now often called PMS as a premenstrual symptom, the rabbis knew that there were such symptoms, and they also knew that each woman was different, that some women would have an excessive feeling of fatigue, hence the yawning, as the precursor to the beginning of her period. Others might have cramping or digestion problems, or any number of other symptoms. And you can see they're leaving the door very open, that a woman will learn how her body signals the beginning of this time. But it does take a little repetition. Any woman who establishes herself for herself one of the symptoms 3 times, behold, this is a regular period. That is what is necessary. So if she has the cramps and then that's immediately followed by her period in the normal timeline, and she has that 3 months in a row consecutively, then the following month she would, when she has that cramp, that would be sufficient as the indicator of the beginning of her period, rather than having to retroactively render things ritually impure from the time of discovery. Does that make sense? Okay. Now we're going to continue talking about this veset issue. So if it doesn't make sense, speak now. Let me just actually double check our live stream chat. Oops. Somebody is mentioning in the live stream very poignantly about the death of somebody and the funeral that is taking place for a paratrooper who was fighting for Israel. And I just saw the note now, and they had asked for a prayer. And of course, we can pause for a moment from this study and allow ourselves that moment of reflection, that as this paratrooper is being laid to rest, that in addition to praying that they come under the peaceful shelter of the Shekhinah, they find eternal peace in Gan Eden, in a place of eternal bliss. We can also hope that no additional lives be lost, that no one else need to sacrifice themselves in this war, no one else need be terrorized or attacked in this struggle, but instead everyone should be allowed to be at home, to be at peace, to be with their family, to find love, and to grow old in the beauty and glory of this world. It is the greatest tragedy that too many people continue to think that their life will have more meaning based upon the death of others. We need to find willing participants in the path for peace, and we need to hold those accountable for all of the inhuman behavior, fully and completely accountable. Again, may the soul of the paratrooper ascend, as we say, to the highest of heights. May they find peace, and may we all be blessed with peace. Just a moment. Mishnah 9. If a woman usually observed her menstrual discharge at the onset of the symptoms of her regular periods, let's make sure you understand that. Again, I know that many of our students are not necessarily the kind of people who have a menstrual cycle. So let's make sure that you understand the terminology being used here. So we just talked about those symptoms in Mishnah 8. Here we are talking about whether or not those symptoms come at the beginning of the menstrual discharge, meaning just prior to the release of the uterine flow, or whether these symptoms happen immediately after the beginning of the uterine flow. That's the two options that we're going to see here in this part of chapter, or Mishnah 9. So first symptom, or the first, segment is dealing with a woman who has the symptoms first, who has her symptoms. Yes, I got myself confused. Right, so the menstrual discharge comes at the onset of the symptoms. Then because they are at the onset of those symptoms, if the discharge comes with the beginning of the symptoms, then that means that anything she is handling while the symptoms are occurring are going to be rendered ritually impure. So if she is washing the dishes, for example, if she is handling the farm tools, whatever it might be, if she is having the symptoms that normally go along with her menstrual cycle, then since for this woman A at the beginning of Mishnah 9 has the flow begin with her symptoms, then that means we presume that the flow is happening throughout that period of the symptoms, and thus whatever she is handling is going to be affected. But if she regularly observed them at the end, meaning the menstrual flow at the end of the symptoms, then all clean things that she handled while the symptoms lasted remain clean. So the second woman B, her uterine flow doesn't usually occur until the symptoms have ended. And because of that, we can then assume that anything she was handling while the symptoms were occurring were not in contact with her while she was in Niddah. Only at the end of the symptoms would that occur. So this gives her time to put things down, if you will. Again, neither of these are better or worse. Neither of them are punishing or favoring one woman or over another. The rabbis are simply looking for what is the pattern for each individual woman, and then what assumptions can we make based upon that pattern. Obviously, if there is no pattern, then we go back to our early chapters for checking, and that retroactive policy will kick into force. But the rabbis were perfectly aware of the uniqueness of each body, and they were perfectly willing to work to make sure that each woman's cycle was being tracked according to her own unique bodily function. Hope that makes sense. Rabbi Yossi said, even days, an hour may determine regular periods, meaning that we can use the calendar or the time of day as a certain cycle. And he argued that if she regularly observed blood flow at sunrise, meaning if that was the normal time when she would observe the flow, then she is forbidden intercourse at sunrise only. So that means that she can no longer be intimate with her husband from sunrise onward on the day that she is expecting this to happen, because that is the normal pattern for her body. Now, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda says all that day is hers. So what he means is that, look, yes, we can have a menstrual cycle that is pinned to a day. So if it's always the 15th day of the Hebrew calendar, or if it's always the 20th day of the Hebrew calendar, keep track of those numbers for a minute, then that day is the day when we assume that her period begins, but it's the whole day that we assume is when the period begins. We are not going to split hairs down to the level of sunrise. So even if she expects to begin menstruation on the sunrise of day 15, from nightfall day 15, it's considered to be her Niddah day, and therefore there is no intimacy from the night onward, even if she is not expecting, doesn't anticipate that it will happen. So the rabbis are very open to the idea of this personal standard, but they're also hesitant to encourage a couple to ride up to the edge of the danger zone. If there is an expectation that it will be that day, then intimacy should stop, even if it's earlier than the last minute that is expected. So he is definitely more strict than Rabbi Yossi, and he does happen to win the day on this particular point. All right, Mishnah 10. If a woman regularly observed menstrual flow on the 15th of the month, told you, and then she changed and observed it on the 20th, both become prohibited. Now, this is talking about a transition period. So for 3 months in a row, it was always the 15th of the Hebrew month, which is much more in cycle to a human cycle. And that meant that she was now established as being presumed Niddah on the 15th month or the 15th of the month and not before. But then in month number 4, she actually has her cycle begin on the 20th. It missed the 15th. Well, by month number 5, both the 15th and the 20th are now prohibited. Why? Because she still had the presumption of the 15th because of the regular pattern that had already been established, and she now has one in the chamber, if you will, of a potential new pattern. So both of them are now prohibited from intimacy. If she changed twice and observed it on the 20th, both are still prohibited. So even if we've now got 3 on the 15th and 2 on the 20th, on month number 6, it's going to be the 15th and 20th that are both prohibited. Again, this is all barring any other signs. If she changed it 3 times to observe it on the 20th, then the 15th becomes permitted, and the 20th is set as her regular day. For a woman does not establish a regular cycle until she sets it 3 times, and she doesn't lose her regular cycle until she is free from it 3 times. And yes, modern English readers would have loved to have had that sentence come first, but that is the principle that the rabbis are explaining, that there is a transition period where sometimes there's going to be double prohibitions, but when you've had 3 repeated and 3 non-repeated, meaning if it was the 16th or 17th or 18th for 3 months in a row, then that would change the 15th and it would be released. It would no longer be considered an expected day. Hopefully that math made sense. All right, we are making good progress. We'll see if we can finish off chapter 9, maybe. women in regard to their virginity are like vines. This is not a poetry. This is a little bit of a euphemism. And here by virginity, they are talking about the actual hymen, the physical indication of virginity. One may have red wine, while another has black wine, meaning that the blood that is released from the time of that first intercourse, for some it might be red, for others it might be black. The coloring of the blood can vary between different women. One vine may yield much wine, while another yields little. Again, the amount of bleeding that comes from the rupturing can vary greatly between two different women. Rabbi Yehuda stated, every vine yields wine, and one that yields no wine is a dorketi. All right, so he wants to point out that, yeah, that's right. There's going to be wine of some variety, and it will be of some quantity. If there is no blood at all, then it is this dorketi term, which is probably a Greek word of Greek origin. But what it is essentially saying is that this is a woman that even if she was a virgin, even if there was a physical of hymen, that means that there's probably an indication of barrenness if there was no bleeding whatsoever. Now, there were many different ways of establishing when the virginity was lost, and the rabbis absolutely understood that virginity was not only lost during the first act of intercourse, that there were many other ways that virginity could be ended. So we're not going to get into all of those tonight, but just understand that this is talking about a perhaps typical case, but that they were well aware that the typical was maybe not even always the majority, given the way life unfolded in antiquity. All right. You know what? Let's go ahead and leave chapter 10 for next week. It has a number of difficult topics to cover, including intimacy with people that in the modern world would certainly be considered underage. And that's something that you should be prepared for next week. And I think it's just easier if we don't get into that topic just right now. So yes, I will beg your indulgence. We'll finish a quarter of an hour early for tonight. And I will look forward to studying next week, even with a difficult topic. And we should hope and pray that there will be a better situation for Israel, that the losses that she has suffered will taper and be done, and that those who perpetrated these crimes will be brought to account. In the meantime, everybody here, continue to look for ways to help. Try not to saturate yourself too much in the never-ending cycle of news, but do stay informed from reputable and reliable sources. Please don't use social media as your primary source. If it's coming from a reputable news agency or from a very, very trusted friend and their own personal experiences, then by all means, yes, it is very important that we stay in touch with people as best as we can during this time, but try to get actual analysis and news from reliable sources. Hope everybody here can take care, and let's hope for a better week.